On April 2, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump unveiled a sweeping set of tariffs aimed at reshaping global trade dynamics, branding the announcement as Liberation Day for American economic sovereignty. The policy imposes a baseline 10% tariff on all imports effective April 5, with significantly higher reciprocal tariffs targeting specific countries starting April 9. Among the steepest are a 34% tariff on China on top of an existing 20%, totaling 54%, 46% on Vietnam, and 32% on Taiwan, alongside 20% on the European Union (EU) and varying rates on other Asian nations like Japan 24% and Thailand 36%. These measures, designed to penalize countries with trade surpluses against the U.S., reflect Trump's long-standing promise to revive American manufacturing and jobs. However, this aggressive protectionism is poised to fail in its objectives, instead escalating inflation, tanking the U.S. economy, and accelerating a decoupling from China and the global economy. Before I go further, we need your support to continue bringing you the latest news, analysis, and live information. Please give us your support, smash the like button, comment, share, and subscribe to all. In 2023, I wrote a book called China 2023. The epic of global dominance, about China achieving global dominance in 2023. That's right, China already achieved global dominance. It already happened. My book is an unbiased analysis of how it happened, the history of China's reemergence in the short span of the past 40 years. My book also predicted China's rapid high-tech revolution, Russia winning the Ukraine war, the decoupling of the world into two camps of the global South and the West. The goal of China is to bring prosperity and harmony to the world. All my predictions have become reality. This power shift has deep and far-reaching impacts on the future of humanity. Please click the links below to view my book and purchase. We need your support to continue. Back to the subject of today's episode. China's swift retaliation, imposing 34% tariffs on all U.S. goods and export controls on 7 rare earth minerals, underscores the futility of this approach. As Beijing has already reduced reliance on the U.S. market over the past 7 years, pivoting toward Belt and Road Initiative BRI markets and the global South. The result will be a diminished U.S. role in international trade, with China emerging as the industrial and trade engine of the rest of the world, leaving the U.S. to face severe economic downturn, industrial stagnation, and technological decline. Details of the high tariffs. Trump's 2025 tariff regime is unprecedented in scope and scale. The baseline 10% tariff applies universally, but the reciprocal tariffs, calculated as an approximation of the U.S. trade deficit divided by a country's exports to the U.S., have in some cases target specific nations perceived as exploiting American markets. China faces a cumulative 54% tariff, building on a 20% levy from earlier in Trump's term, affecting over $400 billion in annual imports. Vietnam, a rising manufacturing hub, is hit with a 46% tariff on its $63 billion in exports to the U.S., while Taiwan, a critical supplier of semiconductors, faces 32% on $37 billion in goods, though chips are currently exempt. The EU, a major trading bloc, sees a 20% tariff on $300 billion in exports, and Japan faces 24% on $36 billion. These rates, effective April 9 unless negotiated away, dwarf previous U.S. tariff actions, raising the average tariff on Chinese goods to 76%, according to estimates from the Peterson Institute for International Economics. The policy also closes the de minimis loophole, previously allowing duty-free entry for packages under $800, a move targeting Chinese e-commerce giants like Temu and Shein. Starting May 2, such shipments face a 30% fee, escalating to $50 per package by June. This broad assault on imports aims to force manufacturing back to U.S. shores, but its design ignores the complexities of global supply chains and the economic realities of modern production. Failure to revive manufacturing and jobs. Trump's tariffs rest on the assumption that high import costs will incentivize companies to relocate manufacturing to the U.S., creating jobs and revitalizing industrial regions. However, this overlooks the structural barriers to domestic production. Manufacturing requires not just factories but skilled labor, infrastructure, and access to raw materials, many of which the U.S. lacks in sufficient quantity or cost competitiveness. For instance, rare earth minerals, critical for electronics and renewable energy technologies, are over overwhelmingly sourced from China, which controls 60 to 70% of global production. China's April 4th retaliation, imposing export controls on 7 additional rare earths: samarium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, lutetium, scandium, and yttrium, exacerbates this dependency as U.S. firms face shortages and higher costs. Moreover, multinational corporations have spent decades optimizing supply chains across Asia, where labor costs remain lower and ecosystems of suppliers are entrenched. A 46% tariff on Vietnam might disrupt imports, but relocating production to the U.S. where wages are 10 to 20 times higher is unlikely. Instead, firms may shift to other low-cost countries like Malaysia 24% tariff or Indonesia, diluting the intended effect. Historical data from Trump's first-term tariffs 2018-2019 supports this. The U.S. added only 12,000 manufacturing jobs annually from 2018 to 2020, far below the promised millions, while industries like steel saw price hikes but minimal job growth due to automation and global competition. The complexity of modern goods further undermines the policy. A smartphone assembled in China incorporates components from Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, countries now facing tariffs. Raising costs across this chain does not make U.S. assembly viable. It simply increases prices or pushes production elsewhere. Thus, rather than a manufacturing renaissance, the tariffs will likely yield marginal job gains at best, offset by losses in import-dependent sectors like retail and logistics. Escalation of U.S. inflation. The tariffs' most immediate impact will be inflationary. By raising the cost of imported goods comprising 15% of U.S. GDP, consumer prices will surge. The Tax Foundation estimates that the April 2nd tariffs, combined with prior levies, will increase U.S. prices by 2.5% in 2025, with a cumulative $1.5 trillion in revenue over a decade dwarfed by economic damage. Everyday items like clothing 70% imported, much from China and Vietnam, electronics, and furniture will see sharp price hikes. The closure of the de minimis loophole alone will raise costs for millions of small packages, hitting low-income consumers hardest. Businesses, unable to absorb these costs, will pass them on. The Federal Reserve's Jerome Powell warned on April 4th that the tariffs, larger than expected, risk higher inflation and slower growth, potentially forcing tighter monetary policy. Historical precedent reinforces this. Trump's 2018 tariffs on steel and aluminum raised U.S. producer prices by 1 to 2%, contributing to a 3.2% inflation peak in 2019. With 2025 tariffs far broader, inflation could hit 5 to 6%, eroding purchasing power and triggering stagflation, high prices paired with economic stagnation, tanking the U.S. economy. The economic fallout will extend beyond inflation. The Tax Foundation projects a 0.7% GDP contraction from the tariffs, with J.P. Morgan raising recession odds to 60% by year-end 2025. Global stock markets plummeted after the April 2nd announcement, with the Dow Jones dropping 5.5% and the Nasdaq entering bear territory by April 4th. China's retaliation 34% tariffs on $144 billion in U.S. exports hits agriculture, soybeans, pork, energy, LNG, and manufacturing, sectors already reeling from prior trade wars. U.S. farmers, who exported $29.25 billion to China in 2020 down from $40.8 billion in 2022, face further losses, while manufacturers like Boeing lose competitiveness. Consumer confidence, already fragile, will erode as prices rise and layoffs mount in import-reliant industries. The tariffs' revenue to $0.9 trillion over a decade cannot offset this damage, as it assumes static trade volumes unlikely given retaliation and supply chain shifts. The U.S. dollar may weaken amid uncertainty, as Trump's fiscal policies, tax cuts, debt expansion clash with trade disruption, further chilling investment. The result is a self-inflicted wound, shrinking the U.S. economy while failing to achieve its protectionist goals. China's retaliation and reduced U.S. reliance. China's response on April 4th was swift and strategic. 34% tariffs on all U.S. goods, export controls on 7 rare earths, and sanctions on 11 U.S. firms, including drone makers tied to Taiwan arms sales. This mirrors Trump's 34% rate, signaling a tit-for-tat escalation. Beijing also launched anti-dumping probes into U.S. medical equipment and an anti-monopoly investigation into DuPont, showcasing a broader retaliatory toolkit. Over the past 7 years, China has steadily reduced exports to the US, reflecting a deliberate pivot from American markets. In 2017, before Trump's first trade war, China exported $505 billion to the US, per US Census Bureau data. By 2024, this fell to $427 billion, a 15% drop despite global trade growth. Adjusted for inflation, the decline is steeper. China's share of U.S. imports dropped from 21.6% in 2017 to 16.5% in 2024, as firms rerouted goods through Vietnam and Mexico, now tariffed at 46% and 25%, respectively. Meanwhile, China's total exports grew from $2.6 trillion in 2017 to $3.38 trillion in 2024, per World Bank estimates, with the U.S. market shrinking from 22% to 12% of its total. This shift aligns with China's Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013, which has expanded trade with 150 countries. BRI trade volume reached $2.5 trillion in 2024, up 50% from 2017, with infrastructure projects boosting markets in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia. China's exports to Russia surged 60% since 2017 to $110 billion in 2024, fueled by Western sanctions, while EU trade grew to $800 billion despite tensions. The global South Asia, Africa, Latin America now accounts for 45% of China's exports, up from 35% in 2017, per China customs data. Domestically, China's 2025 growth target of 5% relies on consumption stimulus, offsetting U.S. trade losses. Decoupling and global trade realignment. The tariffs and retaliation will slash U.S.-China trade, accelerating a decoupling that leaves the U.S. isolated. Bilateral trade, peaking at $659 billion in 2018, fell to $560 billion by 2024 and could have again by 2027 as tariffs bite. Global trade will follow. The EU, Japan, and others, facing U.S. levies, may deepen ties with China, which offers a $15 trillion economy and manufacturing prowess. The U.S., importing $3.2 trillion annually, risks losing access to cost-effective goods, while its $144 billion in exports face barriers. China, already the world's top manufacturer, 30% of global output, will solidify its role as the trade and industrial hub for the BRI and Global South. Its technological edge evident in 5G, EVs, and renewables will grow as U.S. firms lose supply chain access. The U.S., decoupled from this engine, will see exports stagnate, with allies like Japan 24% tariff and South Korea 25% hedging toward China. U.S. economic downturn and stagnation. The U.S. faces a grim future. A 0.7% GDP drop, per Tax Foundation models, underestimates long-term damage as trade shrinks and innovation falters. Industrial stagnation will follow as firms, cut off from global inputs, struggle to compete. Technological decline looms without rare earths and Asian semiconductors, Taiwan's exemption notwithstanding. Trump's tariffs, far from liberating, will trap America in a cycle of decline, ceding global leadership to a resilient China. Thank you for watching. We need your support to continue bringing you the latest news, analysis, and live information. Please give us your support, smash the like button, comment, share and subscribe to all. Click on the links below to view and purchase my book. Thank you for your support.